Jake had been driving for hours, his fingers stiff against the wheel, his body aching from exhaustion. The storm outside raged, heavy sheets of rain slamming against his windshield, his wipers barely keeping up. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning briefly illuminated the long, empty highway stretching ahead. There was nothing but darkness, and the occasional flicker of a road sign disappearing into the night. He was used to the solitude. Long-haul trucking had been his life for years now. But tonight, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, an oppressive silence between the crashes of thunder that made his skin prickle. Then he saw her. A figure stood by the side of the road, illuminated by the high beams of his truck. A woman in a flowing white dress, drenched from head to toe, her long, dark hair plastered to her pale face. She trembled, her arms wrapped around herself, and even through the heavy rain, Jake could tell she was barefoot. His gut told him to keep driving. He had heard enough stories from other truckers about hitchhikers on lonely roads, tales of setups, scams, and worse. But something about the woman made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way she shivered, or the absolute stillness in her expression, as if she had accepted her fate in the storm. With a sigh, Jake pulled to the side of the road. The woman didn't move. He leaned over, opening the passenger side door, and called out, "Ma'am, you need a ride?" She hesitated for a moment, then slowly climbed in. Her movements were deliberate, almost too smooth. She didn't speak, didn't even glance at him. The door shut with a quiet finality, and she sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. The only sound was her slow, even breathing, and the way her breath fogged up the window. Jake cleared his throat as he pulled back onto the road. "Rough night to be out walking," he said, trying to keep the conversation light. Silence. "You got a name?" More silence. Jake stole a quick glance at her. She was staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable, lips slightly parted. Something about her unsettled him, but he pushed the feeling aside. After a few miles, he reached for the radio, needing something to break the quiet. Static crackled. Then a voice came through, distorted by the storm's interference. Reports confirmed that a truck driver was found dead on Highway 17 last night. Witnesses say he picked up a woman, but she disappeared. Jake's stomach dropped. He turned his head slowly toward his passenger, dread creeping up his spine. But the seat beside him was empty. His breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched the wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The air in the cab suddenly felt colder, heavy with something unseen. His heart pounded in his chest. The seatbelt where the woman had been sitting was still buckled. The window was still fogged up from her breath. Jake swallowed hard, forcing himself to think rationally. He had to be imagining things. Maybe she had slipped out when he wasn't looking. Maybe a noise came from behind him, a slow, deliberate creak. His eyes flicked to the side mirror, his stomach twisting in fear. The trailer door was slightly open, swaying gently in the wind and rain. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, something unseen shifting in the shadows. Jake's instincts screamed at him to drive, to keep going, to not look. But his body didn't listen. He reached for his flashlight and, with trembling hands, pulled the truck over to the side of the road. The rain had lessened, but the wind howled around him as he stepped out into the cold night. His boots crunched against the wet gravel as he made his way toward the back of the trailer. He hesitated, gripping the flashlight so tightly his fingers ached. Then, slowly, he pulled the door open the rest of the way. Darkness. The beam of his flashlight cut through the void, revealing nothing but the empty cargo space. Just boxes, stacked the way they had been when he left. No sign of movement, no sign of the woman. But then, something caught his eye. Faint, wet footprints on the metal floor of the trailer, leading toward the back wall, and stopping abruptly. Jake swallowed, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He stepped back, ready to shut the door, when a whisper echoed from inside the trailer. impossibly close to his ear. "You shouldn't have stopped." His flashlight flickered and went out. Jake slammed the trailer door shut, heart hammering in his chest. He ran back to the truck, locking the doors as soon as he was inside. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel, his breathing ragged. He didn't stop again until he reached the next truck stop, the neon lights cutting through the night like a beacon of salvation. Inside the brightly lit diner, Jake sat at the counter, his coffee untouched, his hands still trembling. A few other truckers sat nearby, chatting, laughing, completely unaware of the terror that still clung to him like a second skin. An older man beside him noticed his pale face and weary eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a chuckle. Jake didn't respond. The man stirred his coffee. "You driving the highway tonight?" Jake nodded, absently. "Did you see her?" the man asked, his voice lowering slightly. Jake's heart nearly stopped. He turned to the man, his throat dry. "Who?" "The woman in white," the man said, his expression grim. "Truckers see her every now and then. Some pick her up, some drive past. But the ones who stop," he shook his head, "they don't always make it." Jake felt the cold settle deep into his bones. He pushed his coffee away, his appetite gone. That night, he parked his truck under the brightest lights he could find and locked every door. But no matter how much he told himself it was over, he knew one thing for sure. She was still out there, waiting.